Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's interview for Swipe SciComm, issue number 2. Today, I have the great privilege of interviewing Amy and Roger Aines, who have been good friend of for now quite a few years. So let me give you a very quick introduction about the kind of power couple we're dealing with today. So Amy is a communication strategist, trainer, coach. She loves helping researchers to succeed. She was a former telecommunication industry executive and played many communication roles, working with scientists and technologists. She has been a PR spokesperson for a $10 billion company, culture builder, technical writer, motivator, change manager, media trainer, facilitator, speech writer, and coach. She now runs her own communication consulting firm. These days, she spends most of her time designing and delivering workshops for universities and government agencies. And then we have Dr. Roger Aines, who develops climate and energy technologies with a 40-year experience working at the US National Laboratory System. He applies his principles of championing science, and by doing that, he has helped funders, collaborators, and peers to support his work. Nice wordplay here. Roger currently is the chief scientist of the energy program at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And what he's working on is to managing carbon emissions and carbon sequestrations, which is a very interesting topic we might touch on later. And current focus is to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and safer methods for producing environmentally clean fuel. Wow, what a power couple. Welcome to today's interview. I'm very excited to have you here. To start off, I know some fun facts here that, you're, of course, co-authors of a book, but also a couple. So a little bird told me that Roger proposed writing this book before he proposed to get married. How did that come about? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's very true. I knew that there were a lot of problems that the scientists that I knew faced in communication. And when I started dating Amy, I knew that she had solutions to a lot of them. So I trapped her in the car on a long drive. I had my notes all ready to go. I had my pitch all ready to go. And I said, we talked about the importance of this. And she said, oh, maybe that's a white paper. And I said, no, I think it's a book. And she agreed to eventually write the book. And the funny thing about that is that when I later asked her to marry me, I knew what she was going to say. But when I asked her to write the book, I really didn't know what she was going to say. So I was delighted she said yes.
Yeah. And for us, it was just a labor of love. And if you can write a book together, it bodes well for your marriage, I got to say.
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely
sharing, respect, idea generation, having a shared goal. And one of my favorite things about being in this together was when we got the official word from University of California Press. Our publisher has a committee that has to ultimately say yes.
Of course.
And we were traveling and in an archaeological site on the island of Skye when we found out that they said yes to our book, and to be able to have that moment together was pretty special.
Yeah.
So that must have been quite a moment to celebrate. So back in 2018, I got an email from somebody called Amy Aines, and she was reaching out because she was interested in getting a book trailer for her book, Championing Science. And we made that trailer, which is still something we're very proud of. It's very, very nice. And I hope it really helped you to promote the book to a broader audience. And then we actually had the opportunity to meet in person in Melbourne.
Right. Roger had a conference in Australia, and you and I were changing messages and realized you were going to be in Melbourne at the same time we were. And it was pretty magical to be able to sit down together and begin thinking about, how to use what you excel at to help us take our book out to the marketplace and to all the researchers and scientists who don't get this training when they're in school. They're too busy learning to be experts. And It's as if academia does a bit of a disservice by not giving them the skill sets that you bring with the work that you do, and that we bring through our book and through the workshops that I do. So it was terrific to get a chance to collaborate with you in person and start thinking together about how to tell the story of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a fun one to make. I would say easy because, when reading your notes, and I was just nodding my head. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree with pretty much everything they said. And when I read the book, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, there's so much truth in this book. It really is something every researcher should read, in my opinion. And it's probably something they should get back to time. It's one of those books that needs to be read a few times, because there's so much in it that is useful, and you just can't apply everything in one go, right? I wish I could read like a robot, but no, human beings retain only this much after reading a book once, but there's so much in it.
To
So,
this day, Julio,
hmm?
I find myself giving a presentation and I'll think, wait a minute, that's not how I said to do it in the book. And then I change it. Like, wait a minute, take your own advice, Roger.
Yeah. And what's fun for us is, we were just in September, we were in Denver doing a workshop for the Department of Energy, and Roger gave a talk and I had a 4-hour session, and there was somebody there who said, I use your book all the time. It's my Bible. I refer to it all the time. And it was just so fun for us to have those moments where somebody reinforces for us that what we spent the time writing down was really of value. Because, I was in my profession for so many years thinking it was common sense in a lot of ways. And it wasn't until we got together that I came, yeah, that I came to appreciate that there was a gap and that I could have a bigger impact by helping more and more really smart technical experts convey their information to colleagues, to peers, to decision makers. So it's been a lot of fun having that as a backdrop for some of what he does and some of what I do.
Absolutely. And so, Roger, you worked on this very important report, State of California report, which led to the national efforts to get to net zero. How did all these communication principles you learned, and you had the opportunity to discuss with Amy? How did it all play out? What was the story of that report? Because I know it's quite an important piece.
Well, the report was to outline the options that the state of California had for getting to net zero. And the problem they had was that they had already had a plan that would get them about 80% of the way there. But in that 80%, they'd already used every tool they had. So they were out of options. They couldn't get all the way to zero. And so we were telling them how they could get there by actually removing carbon dioxide from the air. And, basically adding a negative number to it. And the challenge there is that's a pretty unique new concept, especially for policymakers. And so we had to make sure that we were extracting the essence, that we were talking about only the most important part of the message, not making it complicated, keeping our words straightforward, using words and phrases that people understand, using analogies so that they could to use their own experience to help expand the understanding that they were getting in talking to us. And it was the classic case of what we wrote the book to help people do, of to get these complex scientific ideas across to people who needed to understand the essence of them, but didn't have the time or the training to understand all the detail.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time really thinking about the messaging, what would resonate, talking about climate math, this idea of subtracting, and to explain this concept of the sort of the new climate math, because that gets people familiar with the idea that there's an equation here to make these numbers work. So simple things like that really help, especially for the less technical policymaker, help make the information accessible. And that's one of the challenges that I know you've seen, and as you work with researchers, is to distill the idea. It's the importance of making it into a simple equation instead of all of the details, which are overwhelming to people who aren't familiar.
And it's so important to let people absorb these things gradually. You can't expect to walk in and give someone a treatise on the scientific research you've been doing for the last 10 years. They can't absorb that. So you need to come in and say, this is what is important, and come back a second time and say, and this is what you might want to do about it, and come back a third time and say, and these are the kinds of programs that you might use to implement that. And it feels slow, but in fact, it's letting the people absorb it at a pace that they're able to understand a new concept, because this is all brand new to them. Imagine what it was like when you first learned calculus. Some people learned that on the first day, but I didn't. It takes a little while to absorb those kind of complex concepts.
And of course, for something like this, when you're dealing with policymakers, the ultimate goal is to move them to act based on your evidence-based knowledge. And I'll share with you this quote I got a few years back from one of my public speaking coaches. And during his workshop, he said, amateur speakers talk to share information. Professional speakers talk to move people to action. And that hit home so much. And if you think about it, at all scientific conferences on this planet, there's a lot of talking to share information. There's also a lot of bragging. Oh, by the way, I published a new Nature paper. Look how amazing my research is. But what there's not enough of is to, construct presentations with the goal in mind, which is not just to share information. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities and missed opportunities at the moment, because there's not this perspective is just not common for researchers. And I see it even with our customers. Like, lots of people come to us and I ask them, so what's your goal to make this video? It's going to cost you some money. What do you want to get out of it? What action do you want people to take? And many of them are like, oh no, I just want to share this information. And I'm always like, yeah, but it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? You can do so much more,
And scientists don't understand the concept of a message. They think a message is a bunch of information. And Amy has helped me learn this. And every time I'm working with a policymaker or something, Amy sits down and helps me work on my message. What's the thing I want them to take away from this? And it's not that I'm really smart. That's not my message.
Yeah. Or that he's done a lot of work.
Yeah.
There was a lot of work that went into that report, but that certainly wasn't what they were busy conveying. And, as a strategist, I always take a step back and I really try to understand who's listening. And I don't think about audience. I think about listeners, because I want to engage them. I want to make it easy for them to listen. And if I talk over their heads, they can't listen, or they can't listen for very long, right? Nor are they going to be inspired to listen. And it's not just what you say to them. You want to think about three things: what you want the people listening to you to think and feel and do. And feelings drive behavior. So most scientists don't think about the fact that as humans, we feel first. But when you live in an analytical mind, you often think that people think before they feel, and that's not how we're wired. So an important part of thinking about all of this as communicators is, how can your work have a bigger impact? Who needs to see it? Who needs to collaborate with you? How do you find those collaborators? What's it going to take to reach the people who can help you make a bigger impact? And I know that's a big driver. I think that's what you and I really clicked on when we first had conversations, was we want to use our capabilities and skills to help people do more with theirs.
Absolutely. There's so much great science out there, and what gets communicated is just a small fraction of it. But the reality is that there's so much research funded with taxpayer money that nobody gets to hear about, and it has no impact whatsoever. And that's a real shame. And I didn't want it to happen to my own PhD research, and that's what pushed me to do something different beyond writing this peer-reviewed paper, which is what everyone else was doing. I turned it into an animation, and I saw that working really, really well, and that opened a whole new career path, which eventually led me here today.
And you said something else that's really important, Tulio, and that is, having the courage to stand out. You know, when you
Mm,
think about how academics have trained their students, there's a very formal, scholarly way of being. And that doesn't make it easy for a lot of people to find your work accessible. And yet a lot of young researchers feel like that's appropriate. That's how you show up as a professional. And when you're willing to stand out, when you're willing to use analogies and use design and create a poster that isn't an eye chart, you know, right there, that makes a huge difference. A poster with a clear message. That starts to help you stand out, and that's where impact comes. That's where influence comes too, because you can't pile it on. People on the receiving end, decision makers in particular, have so much that is thrown at them that you can't overload them.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
that's
feel
one of
like
the
I can nod with you for the whole day. But I know you have some very interesting stories from the people that read Championing Science and decided to put it to work and apply those principles. So I'm very curious. Can you share a couple of stories which I think might inspire our listeners?
Absolutely. One student in particular who happens to be in the climate arena had read the book and had come to a workshop and used the principles to apply for a fellowship, a climate related fellowship. And you could probably say a little bit more about Rory's success with that. But he understood this was something that was being supported by John Kerry, and he understood what it would take to appeal to John. And he really thought about John as his listener and how to talk about his point of view, which wasn't necessarily exactly the same as John Kerry's point of view, but he got very strategic in his approach, and in his efforts won the fellowship. So these are principles that he built into his application, and it landed him the opportunity. And more recently, a student came was saying that he found our workshop really valuable, and I wrote to him and I said, well, tell me more. And I was blown away by what he said. He said, I was in the middle of a conversation with collaborators and I could tell that we weren't agreeing. So I started to use some of the curiosity skills you were teaching and ways of asking questions and helping them see that I saw it differently, instead of disagreeing, instead of coming across with a really negative tone, just very, very neutral language to say, you know, I see it differently and here's how I see it. And then he started using some other communication techniques to build rapport and totally turned it around. He was amazed because he didn't think that they would ultimately be able to move forward and get to a decision, a shared decision, and they did. So there are so many things about learning how to communicate effectively. Yes, it's important to think about giving talks, but also your interpersonal communications is another part of what I think of as the rocket fuel for success. When you build your skill set and the whole continuum of skills that help make you a more effective communicator, you work better together with the people who will ultimately help you succeed.
100%. So that's led me to a question for Roger. So Roger, you work in the climate change space, and it can be contentious and unfortunately politicized. And I just went to a climate talk last week, and there was always that hostile person in the audience saying, "Oh, this is a load of crap," blah blah blah. Do you have a tip? What tip would you give to our audience in terms of how to handle when you're in a public setting and 90% of the people are agreeing with you, but then there's that vocal minority, and you don't want them to feel stupid because that doesn't really solve anything. What would be the right way to handle such a situation?
Amy's questions is the way that you go ahead. Rather than saying, I don't agree with you, you ask them questions about what's important about what they're saying or how they feel about this problem. And if it's after you've given a talk and it's a question from the audience, a really good thing to do at that point is to say, I'd be really interested to talk to you about that. Can we get together afterwards? Instead of it becoming contentious in front of the audience. And that's a hard place to really have a conversation with someone, to really connect with them and find out why they were thinking that. I had an early experience with a Native American here in California who came to a talk that we were talking about carbon dioxide storage underground. And he said, I want to know why let me see if I can phrase this right. He basically believed that a carbon dioxide leak had killed a bunch of people from his tribe in the early 1800s. And I knew nothing about that. And it was quite, like, this is a dangerous thing. We shouldn't do this. This killed these people. And I said, we need to talk about it. And it turned out that he just wanted to be heard. He wanted to find out what I knew about it. It was nowhere near as contentious as he appeared to be. And we ended up having a terrific conversation about it.
That's a great example. Yeah, so you should never shoot people down. You should actually listen and understand where they're coming from and why they think that way, and be open to different point of views. And if you at the end you really don't agree, well, we agree to disagree. But it's never, confrontation is never really the solution, isn't it?
Well, and you can almost always learn something from somebody, even if it's just an appreciation for how their perspective was shaped and why it's different from yours. And I think as researchers go out to try to impact change, the more they understand where people are coming from, the better able they are to have the kind of conversation to help get to some sort of shared position. And like you said, sometimes you have to agree to disagree.
I like to approach every conversation like that with the assumption that the person I'm talking to is trying to do the right thing, but that we may not agree on our standards of what constitutes the right thing. But I don't approach it as you're a bad person or you're trying to do the wrong thing. You just have a different set of values than I do, or a different perception of the problem, which is often the case. People rank the relative merits of problems very differently. If you don't have enough food to eat every day, you're not worried about climate change right now. That's not your first concern. And you just have to recognize that that's true for everybody. Everybody ranks problems differently.
Well, and when it comes to climate, there's a need for so many solutions. There isn't the one answer. And one of the messages that Roger uses again and again is we need to keep a big tent. We need all these pieces to help solve this. And that's a really important message, because it helps everybody feel like they can be engaged and they don't have to fight for their own win.
Exactly. Don't fight with your allies.
Yeah, we're all in this together, aren't we? Climate change is everyone's problem. We should not fight about it
together.
And I like how Neil deGrasse Tyson is now pushing for this cosmic perspective. I don't know if you came across some of his most recent talks and books, but he pushes for this idea that, when you're out in space, imagine to be an astronaut and you look back at Earth, it's just this tiny blue dot in the vastity of nothing. And, all this hatred and problems and wars and stuff we have here on Earth kind of melts away when you assume that perspective. And it really, I think, will be useful for our leaders to think a bit more that way, get that cosmic perspective, because we're all in this together. And climate change, it's just like the pandemic. It's everyone's problem, You cannot hide from it, unfortunately. All right, so the climate scientist in me, after hearing lots of negatives and gloomy things last week, or like a glimmer of hope. Roger, can you tell me some good news, something that makes you feel positive about the developments, maybe in carbon capture and storage? I know you're at the forefront of this field. What's exciting?
I'll give you a fact that really made me smile. I served as one of the reviewers on the X Prize for carbon removal from the atmosphere. And companies are still competing. The first round is done, but they're still competing for $100 million. And in the first round, part of the process was you had to demonstrate that you're a competent company, you have a plan, you have, all the foundation to be able to compete. And 207 companies qualified. Blew me away. That you think, oh, there's only a few solutions. No, there's 207 companies that are qualified to pursue this. And, they're not all going to win. Only 10 of them won $1 million, but that's, the other 197 are still out there competing for the next round. That really makes me feel good that there's that much capacity out there and that many new ideas and that many smart people who are dedicating their lives to this.
And the other thing that I hear a lot, we have some interesting dinner table conversations. So I have kind of an insider's view on a lot of this. And what always gives me hope is the fact that we understand how to solve the problem. We have the core technologies. We know enough about the math. And what we have to do is scale. And what that means, and I've seen a real shift in Roger's work over the years. When we were first together, he was very focused on learning who was doing what were all the technology potential solutions. And now it's about, how do you get everybody to line up? How do you get everybody to line up? How do you get the policymakers to make a call, take a stand? How do you get the activists to be in it in a way where they're looking at the benefits to the communities instead of just trying to create barriers? How do you get people? How do you create the market? All of those things require a kind of communication skill to create partnerships and collaboration where people have to really listen to each other and define common goals and move together in a way that will get us there. And so it's become more evident to me how important the range of communication skills becomes when you're solving a problem like this. But the hope is that we know how to do it. We just need to line up and agree to work together to get it done.
Love it. I love a good source of optimism when it comes to climate change, especially. Okay, so the common thread here is that everything can be learned if you're willing to learn. So I think step one for every listener will be to read Championing Science. There's a lot of great knowledge in there. But I also know you Aines, are very active in giving workshops and coaching. How can people learn about that? What sort of training do you offer?
Well, after writing the book, it became clear to me that I could go even deeper to teach people how to do these things. So I've developed a whole range of workshops on topics like creating trusted and productive collaborations and how to be a more engaging and compelling speaker. It's one thing to be clear. It's another thing to really bring people in and connect with them in a way that makes you stand out as a speaker. And one of the interesting things, Tulio, I discovered is a lot of young scientists and researchers aren't necessarily thinking, I need better skills. But when it comes to going out into the job market, they recognize they need to tell their own story. They need to understand how to do that effectively. So a lot of the workshops I've given have been around how to tell your story in interviews, how to use communication strategy to get decision makers to hire you. And that's been a lot of fun. Worked with a number of people who've gone through their second rounds of interviews and gotten an offer. And that's very gratifying for me to know that as they learn to be more effective communicators, I'm thinking about Randy Olson's interview and the importance of storytelling. That's a big part of how you convey and engage people. And that's a skill you can learn. So I have a whole list of workshops. They're posted on the website. People can take a look at that. And I love doing the one-on-one coaching, especially when people have a big, important presentation they're giving, if they're trying to get a decision maker to say yes. There's a whole methodology that I teach around getting decision makers to be more inclined to saying yes. So it's been a lot of fun for me to bring the book to life through these workshops.
Absolutely. I can imagine that. And so, yeah, for you listening, if you feel like you're, lagging a bit behind on the things discussed, you can learn. We all, nobody here was born knowing all of this stuff. We all learned it. And the fact that unfortunately training opportunities are not common doesn't mean they're non-existent. There are training opportunities, and if you understand the importance of science communication, and I hope by now you do, if you're reading this magazine, it's a good sign. All these things can be learned, and you totally should, because the compound the benefits compound in a way it's unbelievable. Like there's really, if you just think about public speaking, a public talk done well, I think, is the single most influential and persuasive thing out there. I think it's unbeatable. I'm in the business of making videos, but I still believe that a talk well structured, well done, compelling, emotional, that ticks all the boxes, I think that's still number one in terms of influence you can have on an audience. So there's really a lot of reasons why you should consider this, but it's a good thing that you're here listening and reading this magazine. All right, so it's about time to wrap things up. So I guess the best place for people to learn more about the book and what you do is championingscience.com. Is that right?
Indeed, indeed. And there are 11 key principles that we talk about in the book. And we've got a poster that's available. People can access that through Swipe. So feel free to grab your copy of the poster, and it'll give you a high-level sense of some of the core ideas that we write about in the book. And if you're part of a university and you've got a professional development organization there, that's how I usually do my workshops. It's through university organizations versus one-on-one with students. That would be more of a coaching kind of situation. So feel free to reach out to me or connect me to people who are part of your academic world if you think that the sorts of things we've been talking about would be beneficial to your students. I'm thinking about the folks from Kansas.
Yeah.
We were approached by a group of students who actually got funding to do a book club with Championing Science. And then part of their funding was to have us come and do a workshop with them. And they were very interested in influencing policy. So get creative with ways to engage with us. And we especially like to do projects together. As you can tell, we kind of like each other.
So true.
Amazing. Love it. Okay, well, I think we can wrap things here for today. Thank you so much for being available for this interview. I am very, very happy to have an opportunity to spread the word about the great work you do and your book. I believe that not enough scientists are aware of the kind of resources available out there to them. And so this is ultimately why I created this magazine, is to create a new resource for the field, a point of reference for the field, to highlight all the great stuff that is happening, just like the work you do. So thank you for being part of it, and I'll see you all listeners to the next issue of Swipe SciComm. Enjoy the rest of the magazine.
Thanks, Julio.
Great to see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.